The Zephyrian council chamber hummed with crystalline harmonics as Admiral Kethvar reviewed the final preparations. 300 years of meticulous planning had led to this moment. The Great Filter, the theoretical event that had silenced countless civilizations across the galaxy, was approaching their sector. Psychological conditioning programs at 98% completion, reported Science Prime Velandra, her iridescent skin shifting through calm blue patterns. Our citizens have mastered the 17 approved emotional states. Fear responses have been surgically reduced to optimal levels. Captain Sarah Chun stood quietly in the corner of the chamber, the only human among the delegation from the Terran colony ships. Her weathered hands bore scars that no Zephyrian would understand, burns from reality fires, fractal cuts from broken spacetime. While the aliens debated contingency plans, she watched their perfectly ordered city through the massive viewport. New Zephyr sprawled beneath them like a living jewel, its bioarchitectural spires pulsing with bioluminescent data streams. Every citizen moved in predetermined patterns, their lives orchestrated to eliminate chaos. No crime, no poverty, no unexpected death. They had built paradise and called it preparation. The Ark ships are fully stocked, continued military coordinator Zethmal. Each vessel contains genetic material from 1,200 species, cultural archives, and survival supplies for 50,000 years. Our simulations indicate a 96% survival probability. Sarah almost laughed. She'd seen those simulations, pristine scenarios where problems had clear solutions and heroes made logical choices. Nothing like the quiet years back on Earth, where her 7-year-old daughter had learned to sing lullabies that kept the shadow wolves at bay, where her grandmother's generation had taught children to dream in locked boxes so their nightmares couldn't crawl out. The chamber's walls suddenly rippled like water. A deep, resonant vibration filled the space, something that bypassed the ears and struck directly at the brainstem. The Zephyrians froze as their perfect lighting system flickered, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. "It's beginning," whispered Velandra, her skin cycling through colors Sarah had never seen before, patterns of pure terror that the Zephyrians' emotional conditioning had never accounted for. Through the viewport, New Zephyr's ordered streets erupted into chaos. Buildings twisted into impossible geometries as the citizens' suppressed fears leaked into reality. A child's terror of falling manifested as gravity wells that pulled screaming pedestrians skyward. An architect's perfectionism became a crystalline maze that trapped hundreds in recursive corridors. The Great Filter had arrived, and it wasn't the cosmic disaster the Zephyrians had prepared for. It was something far worse, a phenomenon that turned the mind's deepest fears into immediate physical reality. Admiral Kethvar collapsed, his neural crown sparking as his carefully conditioned mind shattered against something it couldn't categorize or control. Around the chamber, the most advanced minds in the galaxy crumpled like paper dolls. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the harmonics of terror. "Turn off your lights. Stop trying to understand it. And whatever you do, don't think about what you're most afraid of." For the first time in 300 years, the Zephyrians faced something their perfect preparation hadn't anticipated: the need for a teacher who had learned wisdom through suffering. The emergency shelter beneath New Zephyr's council chamber had been designed for asteroid impacts and solar flares, rational disasters with mathematical solutions. It wasn't built for the sobbing, curled forms of the galaxy's greatest minds, reduced to terrified children by their own unleashed fears. Sarah moved among them with practiced calm, her voice steady despite the chaos above. "Breathe from your center, not your chest. Count backwards from 7. Not 10-7 interrupts the panic spiral better." She knelt beside Velandra, whose bioluminescent skin flickered between terror purple and confusion gray. "I don't understand," the Science Prime whispered. Our emotional dampeners, our psychological barriers, nothing works. How are you so calm? Sarah's laugh held no humor. I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But I learned something you never had to how. To function while afraid. She helped Velandra sit up, her movements gentle but efficient. Tell me, in your perfect society, do children ever wake up screaming from nightmares? No, of course not. We eliminated nightmare disorders in the 3rd generation of genetic optimization. Wrong answer. Sarah stood, addressing the dozen surviving council members. During Earth's quiet years, every human child had nightmares. We had to, because the alternative was worse. When reality becomes unstable, a mind that's never faced its own darkness becomes a weapon against itself. Through the shelter's reinforced ceiling, they could hear the city above transforming. The Zephyrians suppressed fears generations of them were manifesting simultaneously. Childhood terrors of abandonment had spawned void mouths that swallowed entire districts. Adult anxieties about imperfection had crystallized into reality-correcting viruses that deleted anything deemed flawed. Admiral Kethfer struggled to his feet, his neural crown dark and useless. Your species, you've encountered this before? Sarah nodded grimly. We called them the quiet years, because nobody talks about them anymore. Started in 2157, when Dr. Elena Vasquez's quantum consciousness experiment went wrong. For 10 years, human reality was ... negotiable. Thoughts became things. Dreams walked the streets. Children learned to lucid dream before they could walk, because sleeping minds were the most dangerous. She moved to the shelter's control panel. Her fingers dancing across interfaces the Zephyrians had thought too complex for any non-enhanced mind. My grandmother was 16 when it started. She used to tell me stories, how the survivors weren't the smartest or the strongest, but the ones who had already been broken and put themselves back together. Broken how? Velandra asked. Trauma. The word hung in the air like a confession. Abuse, loss, addiction, mental illness, all the things your society eliminated. During the quiet years, those were our advantages. A mind that had already shattered knew how to hold itself together with wire and determination. A heart that had survived betrayal could love something despite knowing it might become a monster. The shelter shuddered as something massive moved above them. Through the emergency monitors, they watched a manifestation of collective Zephyrian perfectionism. A crystalline entity that was systematically correcting the city by erasing anything that deviated from an impossible standard. My daughter. Maya was 7 when she faced her first reality storm, Sarah continued, her voice softening. She was afraid of the dark, like most kids. But when her fear manifested as living shadows that devoured light itself, she did something your conditioning would never allow. What? She befriended them. Talked to her fear like it was a scared animal. Fed it stories instead of terror. By the end of that year, she had a pet darkness that kept other nightmares away. Sarah turned to face them, her scars visible in the emergency lighting. Your preparation was perfect for a perfect disaster. But the universe isn't interested in fairness. Or logic. It's chaos all the way down, and the only way to survive chaos is to learn to dance with it. Above them, the city screamed in 17 different harmonics of terror. So, Sarah said, cracking her knuckles, who wants to learn how to dance? Asterisk, the first lesson happened in the ruins of the Zephyrian Cultural Archive, where they're most precious. Memories had transformed into predatory nostalgia wraiths that fed on regret. Sarah led the survivors through the twisted corridors, teaching them techniques that had no name in their perfect language. Don't resist the memory ghosts, she instructed, as a shimmering form of Velandra's deceased mentor reached toward them. With crystalline claws. Acknowledge them. Say hello, old pain. I remember you, but I'm not you anymore. Velandra's skin rippled through every color of grief. But the psychological protocols, we must maintain emotional equilibrium. Your protocols are what's killing you. Sarah grabbed the Science Prime's hand, pulling her forward through a cluster of manifested childhood fears. Equilibrium is death when reality's having a seizure. You need to learn controlled instability. Behind them, military coordinator Zethmal stumbled as his suppressed anger at centuries of military perfection manifested as a pack of crystalline warhounds. They circled him with predatory patience, growing larger with each moment of his denial. Asterisk. Zethmal, Sarah called. Stop trying to be the soldier they made you, and remember the warrior you were born to be. Your anger isn't your enemy. It's your power source. The Zephyrian skin flashed through spectrums of rage his people had spent generations suppressing. The warhounds paused, confused by his sudden emotional authenticity. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah taught him the most human of survival skills: controlled fury. Channel it, she said, her voice cutting through his internal storm. Don't eliminate your anger, aim it. What are you really angry about? The waste. Zethmal's harmonics cracked with raw emotion. 300 years of preparation, and we're helpless because we prepared for everything except being afraid. The warhounds whimpered and dissolved. His authentic rage had robbed them of the suppressed energy they fed on. Admiral Kethvor watched. From behind a barrier of crystallized authority fears manifestations of his terror of making wrong decisions. This is madness. You're teaching us to embrace our flaws. I'm teaching you to survive. Sarah approached his barrier, noting how it pulsed with self-doubt. Admiral, what's the worst decision you ever almost made? I don't understand the relevance. During the quiet years, my mother saved our entire settlement by making the worst decision possible. Sarah pressed her palm against his crystalline fears. The reality storm was feeding on our hope, growing stronger with every optimistic thought. So she gathered everyone in the town square and told them to despair. Really, truly despair. To imagine the absolute worst outcome. The barrier flickered. That would create more manifestations. It did. The town filled with despair monsters horrible. Beautiful things that embodied every fear we'd ever had about failure and loss and death. Sarah's smile held memories of ancient pain. But you know what happens when you feed a monster everything it wants all at once? Kethver's eyes widened. It becomes sated. It becomes visible. And when something's visible, you can fight it, or befriend it, or just let it know you see it and aren't running anymore. The Admiral's barrier cracked, and through the fissures, Sarah saw him not the perfect leader, but the frightened young Zephyrian who had taken command because someone had to, who had spent centuries doubting every choice. The worst decision I almost made, he whispered, was refusing this mission. I was afraid we weren't ready. You are right to be afraid. You weren't ready. Sarah helped him step through the dissolving barrier. But being ready was never the point. Surviving isn't about preparation. It's about adaptation. It's about failing and getting up and failing better. Around them, the archive began to settle. Not into its original form, but into something new, a space where memory and fear coexisted without consuming each other. The survivors stood among the transformed artifacts, breathing hard, their perfect conditioning cracked, but not broken. Through a gap in the twisted architecture, they could see New Zephyr's skyline, still chaotic, still dangerous, but no longer purely destructive. Some of the manifestations were beginning to stabilize, as if the city itself was learning to accommodate its unleashed unconscious. This is just the beginning, Sarah warned them. We've learned to survive in the filter, but we haven't learned why it's here. And until we understand that, a new sound echoed across the city, not the harmonics of fear, but something else. A signal, ancient and patient, waiting beneath the chaos. Something was calling to them from the heart of the storm. Asterisk. The signal led them deeper into New Zephyr's transformed heart, where the city's central processing core had become something unrecognizable. What had once been a crystalline nexus of pure logic now pulsed with organic geometries, part machine, part organism, part something beyond either category. Sarah's makeshift team of reality-traumatized Zephyrians followed her through corridors that rewrote themselves with each step. Admiral Kethvar had learned to embrace his uncertainties, letting his doubts guide their path rather than his shattered confidence. Velandra's bioluminescence now cycled through previously forbidden emotional spectrums, her scientific mind finally free to explore the unmappable. "The signal's getting stronger," reported Zephmo, his modified military sensors now attuned to chaos frequencies rather than ordered data streams. "But it's not coming from the filter itself. It's coming from underneath it?" Sarah nodded, her scarred hands tracing patterns in the air gestures learned during the quiet years that helped stabilize local reality. "During Earth's crisis, we found something similar. The reality storms weren't random, they were orchestrated. Someone was teaching us." They emerged into what had been New Zephyr's Central Plaza, now transformed into a vast amphitheater of impossible architecture. At its center stood a structure that hurt to look at directly, not because it was ugly, but because it existed in more dimensions than their minds could process. "By the ancient codes," whispered Velandra, her skin cycling through all patterns her species hadn't felt in millennia. "It's a witness node." "A what now?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. She'd seen something similar in the ruins of Geneva after the last reality storm had passed. Theoretical construct from our oldest legends. A device left by the Vive, predecessors, the first civilization to achieve galactic unity. They disappeared billions of years ago, but their technology, Kethvar approached the structure cautiously. It said they could manipulate the fundamental nature of reality itself. The node pulsed, and suddenly they were elsewhere, not physically moved, but their consciousness had been invited somewhere. They stood in a space that was both vast and intimate, where the boundaries between thought and environment had been dissolved completely. "Welcome, young survivors." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carrying harmonics that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to understanding. "You have passed the first trial, learning to exist within chaos rather than impose order upon it. Few species achieve this level of adaptation without extinction." "Trials?" Sarah stepped forward, her counselor's instincts recognizing a teaching moment. "The great filter, it's not a natural disaster. It's a test. The filter is necessity. Reality is more fragile than most civilizations understand. As intelligence spreads across the galaxy, so does the risk of catastrophic reality collapse. Untested minds, given sufficient technology, eventually destroy not just themselves, but the fabric of existence itself." Images flashed around them. Civilizations that had achieved perfect order only to tear holes in spacetime through their hubris. Species that had eliminated all suffering and chaos, only to discover they had eliminated their ability to adapt when the universe demanded change. The Zephyrians prepared for destruction, but not for transformation. They sought to preserve their perfection rather than evolve beyond it. This is why they failed. "But humans didn't fail," Belandra said, understanding beginning to dawn in her bioluminescent patterns. "The quiet years, they weren't an accident, were they? Humanity's reality crisis was the second trial learning to coexist with uncontrolled change. Your species was unique. You had already developed resistance to perfection through your embrace of flaws, trauma, and emotional authenticity. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. "We were being prepared. All the suffering, all the chaos you were teaching us. Not us. You were teaching yourselves. We merely provided the classroom. The ancient presence seemed to smile. Trauma is not punishment, it is inoculation. A mind that has been broken and healed becomes antifragile. It grows stronger through stress rather than weaker. So what now? Kethver asked. What's the third trial? Teaching. You must help other species navigate their own filters. The galaxy stands at a crossroads. Thousands of civilizations are approaching their crisis points simultaneously. They will need guides who understand both order and chaos, who can bridge the gap between perfect preparation and chaotic adaptation. Sarah looked around at her unlikely team of traumatized aliens, seeing them with new eyes. We become counselors for an entire galaxy. The Terran method must spread not through conquest, but through voluntary adoption. Each species that learns to dance with chaos becomes a teacher for the next. Eventually, the galaxy will be populated by civilizations that are antifragile, strengthened by crisis, rather than destroyed by it. The node pulsed, and they were back in the plaza. But something had changed. The chaotic manifestations throughout the city were beginning to stabilize. Not disappearing, but finding sustainable forms. Fear creatures were becoming guardian spirits. Anxiety storms were transforming into creative energy fields. New Zephyr was becoming something unprecedented. A perfect city that had learned to be imperfect. The real adventure is just beginning, Sarah said, watching her alien students start to understand their new role. We're going to teach an entire galaxy how to be beautifully broken. Above them, the stars seemed to pulse with anticipation. Thousands of worlds waiting to learn that survival wasn't about avoiding the storm, but about learning to dance in the rain. Asterisk. 6 months after the Great Filter had transformed New Zephyr, the city had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A hub of controlled chaos where former perfectionists taught emotional authenticity to species from across the galaxy. Sarah stood in what had once been the council chamber, now a circular amphitheater where representatives from 47 civilizations gathered to learn what the Zephyrians had dubbed the human way, though Sarah preferred calling it the survivor protocol. Today we have a new challenge, announced Admiral Kethver, his neural crown replaced with a simple circlet that enhanced rather than controlled his natural abilities. His skin showed the healthy cycling of genuine uncertainty. A leader who had learned to find strength in admitting ignorance. Before them, a holographic display showed the Andromedans' home system in crisis. Their species had achieved perfect telepathic unity, but the Great Filter had turned their collective consciousness into a reality warping hive mind that was systematically erasing individual thought from existence. Traditional approach would be quarantine, reported Velandra, her scientific instruments now augmented with chaos detection arrays. But we've learned that isolation only delays the inevitable collapse. Sarah nodded, studying the data with eyes that had seen similar patterns during the quiet years. Their problem isn't the telepathy, it's the perfection they've created. A mind so unified it can't tolerate deviation. When the filter activated, their collective unconscious had nowhere to go but outward. A young Zephyrian named Kinful raised a tentacle one of the new generation who had grown up during the transformation. What about the Jakarta Protocol? Could we teach them to create intentional discord? Good thinking, Sarah smiled. The Jakarta Protocol was something her grandmother's generation had developed, the deliberate cultivation of productive disagreement to prevent groupthink crystallization. But Andromedans communicate through emotion sharing. Traditional debate would just create collective trauma. Zethmol, now wearing scars as badges of honor rather than shame, suggested, what if we taught them to share trauma? Not to spread pain, but to inoculate their collective consciousness with controlled doses of individual experience? The idea was radical, even by their new standards. But Sarah had learned that the most effective solutions were often the ones that seemed impossible to perfectly ordered minds. 3 weeks later, Sarah and her team were in orbit around Andromeda Prime, their ship a hybrid of Zephyrian technology and human improvisation, preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. Remember, Sarah addressed her mixed crew of humans and transformed aliens, we're not trying to fix them. We're trying to teach them to fix themselves. The descent to Andromeda Prime was surreal. The planet's surface rippled like liquid thought, buildings flowing between architectural styles as the collective unconscious struggled to find stable forms. The population moved in perfect synchronization, their individual bodies puppeted by a singular, terrified mind that had grown too large for its own consciousness. At the planet's capital, they found the source, the grand synthesis chamber, where the Andromedans had first achieved perfect unity. Now it pulsed with chaotic telepathic energy, the collective mind trapped in a feedback loop of its own fears. "It's magnificent," whispered Velandra, her sensors overwhelmed by the psychic storm. "And completely unsustainable. They're burning out their own reality matrix." Sarah approached the chamber's entrance, feeling the weight of billions of perfectly synchronized minds pressing against her consciousness. This was the moment she'd trained for, not in any academy, but in the ruins of her own traumatic past. "Hello," she said, speaking not to the air, but to the collective presence she could feel watching. "My name is Sarah Chun. I'm here to teach you how to fight yourselves." The response came as pure emotion confusion, tinged with desperate hope. "I know you're afraid," she continued. "You achieved perfect unity and discovered it was a prison. You can't disagree, can't grow, can't change without risking dissolution. But I have good news. Dissolution isn't death. It's metamorphosis." She gestured to her team Zephyrians, who had learned to be imperfect, humans who had survived their own reality crisis, and a dozen other species who are mastering the art of beautiful failure. "We're going to teach you to argue with yourselves, to cultivate productive discord, to love your flaws because they're the cracks that let the light in." The Andromedan collective mind recoiled at first, but then something unprecedented happened. A single voice separated itself from the Unity One individual who had been dreaming of disagreement in secret. "Please," the voice whispered through the psychic storm, "show us how to be broken." Sarah smiled, recognizing the sound of a civilization ready to heal. "It's going to hurt at first. Growing pains always do. But I promise you, the view from the other side is worth it." Around them, Andromeda Prime began to change, not into chaos, but into something new. A world where unity and individuality could dance together, where perfection had learned to waltz with imperfection. The great filter wasn't ending, it was evolving, teaching the galaxy one traumatized species at a time that the secret to surviving chaos wasn't avoiding it, but learning to make it beautiful. As Sarah watched the first Andromedan learn to disagree with their collective self, she heard her grandmother's voice echoing across the years. "The survivors aren't the strongest, child. They're the ones who learn to bend without breaking." The galaxy was learning to bend, and it was magnificent. Asterisk.